All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Chapter 11. This is police accountability and ethics. Now, the issue of police accountability has really been an issue of debate for many years. To whom are the police accountable? Is that their supervisor and the chief? Is it the citizens that live, where this police officer works? Is it the elected officials in their city, county, or state? Is it other parts of the criminal justice system? This this issue of to whom and how the police are held accountable is really complicated because there's so many different people that they could be accountable to. But who are they? How are they? How does that all work? All right, so there's two kind of main ways that police behavior is controlled. Okay, the first is through mechanisms of oversight, where the officer's behavior can be tracked, it can be monitored, so then this bad behavior can be identified and then corrected or punished, whatever the outcome is for that. All right, so those mechanisms, those can be internal or external to the police department. So internally, oversight is through things like departmental investigations, early warning systems, bureaucratic constraints, which are things like formalization we've talked about, things like policy, procedures, those kinds of things, chain of command. And then externally, oversight could be through things like citizen review boards, external audits, and other legal ways that the police can be held accountable. So that's the first way. Second way is through standards, which deal with standards of conduct to which the police are held in hiring and training and everyday behavior. What are the codes of conduct? What are the standards of conduct for the police? Let's talk about internal accountability mechanisms. All right, so the bureaucratic organization, the management, those are probably the most important mechanisms for accountability in the day-to-day operations of police officers. Okay, so the first main way is written directives. Now, as we know, because we've talked about this, as we know, police departments are highly formalized organizations, right? So that means that just about every aspect of policing is subject to some combination of policy, guidelines, directives, general orders, some kind of written something to guide their behavior. So departmental policies is one of those things. Now, departmental policies are kind of general statements that give guidance to a police officer on the proper course of action. Okay, there's also departmental goals. Those are a general statement of purpose that are used to identify the role and mission of the police. Okay, there's departmental objectives. Those are specific. They're measurable statements of purpose related to the goal. So you have goals and you have these objectives that are related to the goals that give you measurable things to let you know if you're achieving your goals. And then you have procedure, and that is how the policing is carried out. That's how the policies are carried out. Okay, it's a series of steps to how to do something. Okay, and then you have rules and regulations that identify required or prohibited behavior. So why do they have all these things? Well, the main reason is to inform the officers of what the expected standards of behavior are. Okay, they also want to inform the community of the department's mission, goals, values, policies, procedures, expectations. They want the community to know who they are and what they stand for. Okay, and all these things kind of establish this foundation, this common foundation that all police officers then have in that department. So they're all starting at the same place. They all know this is what's expected of me. All right, so they can all operate from that point going forward. It also provides the grounds for disciplining and counseling officers when they make mistakes or errant officers. It also provides standards for officer supervision and direct training. So all these things work together to make this foundation and provide this real outline for this is what all needs to happen. This is how people need to act. This is what the training needs to look like. If you don't do these things, this is what happens to you. Okay, so all these things establish this framework under which all this other stuff operates. However, like all things, Like, these mechanisms are only as good as the people enforcing them. Okay, these things don't mean a hill of beans if nobody's enforcing, what needs to be happening. Okay, so when officers deviate from these things, managers have choices, right? The managers could choose to ignore it. They can act formally, they can act informally, or they could protect the officer. So when acting formally, it could take the form of something like counseling, where managers may counsel the officer, make the officer go through some additional training, or there could be some kind of disciplinary action or some combination of those. Informally, managers may transfer an officer to a different assignment. Okay, there's different assignments in every jurisdiction or every department that are considered to be less favorable than other assignments. And they're used, or sometimes can be used as punishment, to where everyone knows if you get sent to that assignment, like, you're being punished for something. They also could choose to just protect the officer for a variety of different reasons. Some of them personal to the supervisor. There's a variety of reasons why they might want to just protect the officer. All right, another problem with these directives is not just who's enforcing them, but often these directives say what not to do, but they don't say what to do. Okay, so officers may know I'm not supposed to do that, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Okay, and then the other problem also is the police try to regulate just about everything that they can. Okay, so you end up with pages and pages and pages and pages, thousands of policies or directives or whatever, where it's impossible for officers to know them all. It's impossible for officers to be familiar with all of them. And it's impossible for them to really avoid breaking some policy at some point, because there are so many of them that it gets to the point where they can't possibly know them all. And they end up possibly breaking policy with no intention of doing that. Okay, internal investigations can also be used to respond to citizen complaints or concerns about police behavior. In larger organizations, this is often internal affairs office or some kind of office of professional standards. Investigations can come from a variety of things. It could come from citizen complaints. It could come from fellow officers' complaints. Misconduct could be uncovered through some other means, and that could start an investigation. It could be allegations from an outside agency. There's a variety of ways that these internal investigations can get started. All right, so if you're an officer that's involved in one of these investigations, you're the subject of it, they are allowed due process. However, at least at first, most of these are not some kind of legal proceedings. Okay, this is a disciplinary hearing, so it's what you're allowed due process-wise is different, because this isn't an actual criminal proceedings. Okay, so example, if the police department wants to search your locker at the police department, they can do that. Okay, it's not your locker, it's the police department's locker. If they want to take your department-issued phone and look at it, they don't have to get a warrant to do that. They can just take it. If they want to search your patrol car, right? Things like that, where normally if somebody wants to search your phone for something, they have to get a warrant for that. Okay, but if it's the police department's phone during a disciplinary hearing, they don't have to have a warrant to do that. Also, if they would do some kind of search that would be considered unlawful, they can still use that evidence at a disciplinary hearing, but you wouldn't be able to use that in legal proceedings, because that would be fruit of the poisonous tree, and you cannot use evidence that is obtained unlawfully. All right, so once the investigation is complete, there's several possible outcomes. The complaint could be sustained, which means the investigation found the complaint justified. They can be found unsubstantiated, which means there was not any evidence to prove the complaint, so they can't determine if it was true or false. And this is the most common outcome. There's unfounded complaints, and those are ones where the evidence was found that the subject of the complaint did not occur, And then exoneration is where the complaint was found to be factually true, but the officer's actions were justified. All right, so then if an officer is found guilty of a complaint, there are a variety of possible outcomes for them. Those are outlined in the book, so please, take a look at those. But here's a few things to remember about citizen complaints. Okay, the rate of complaints varies among police departments. Okay, police departments don't have. Excuse. Sorry about that. Police departments do not have the same kind of rate of complaints kind of across the board. There's also the percentage of sustained complaints also varies department to department. When you have complaints that are alleging excessive force, those are usually sustained less often than other types of complaints. And then you have a small number of officers generating a disproportionate number of complaints. And oftentimes those are younger officers, officers under 30 or less than 5 years on the job. They also generate a disproportionate number of complaints. Okay, another internal control mechanism are early warning or early identification systems. All right, so these are systems that are set up to track specific types of officers' behavior. Okay, so when it tracks these behaviors, then everybody's allotted like there's a certain number of things that you're allotted. Okay, so say you're allowed to have 2 use of force complaints in a year. Once an officer hits 3 of those, the system then alerts the supervisor, hey, this person has exceeded what would be considered to be an average number of this type of behaviors. Whatever that number would be. I just threw those numbers out. But there's always a threshold for something. Okay, and then after an officer exceeds that threshold, the system alerts the supervisor that that's happened. So one of the nice things about these systems is that we talked about supervisors can ignore behaviors. Well, you can't when you have this early warning system. Because the system tells you. Like, you can't pretend it didn't happen. The system has generated a report. All right, so then, so these systems are also based on the premise that we just talked about, that a small percentage of officers generates the most improper behavior. Okay? One of the issues with this is it relies on official records of behavior, so official reports, those sorts of things. So in order for something to get in the system, the officers have to put it in to start with. So I think you can see where there might be a problem here, or could be potentially a problem there. If things don't get in the system, they can't get flagged. These systems also rely on citizen complaints, so there has to be appropriate mechanisms in place for those complaints to get into the system. If those complaints don't get in the system, then the early warning system doesn't work. Okay, so you've got to be able to, the officer stuff's got to get in there, and the citizen stuff's got to get in there. If it doesn't, then the system doesn't work. Okay, another accountability mechanism, and this is a new one, body-worn cameras. Now, body-worn cameras are very, very new, and they should help with accountability, and preliminary research suggests that they do. Preliminary research suggests that citizen complaints decrease when police are wearing body-worn cameras, and also decreases use of force incidents. Is that because officers behave different? Is it because citizens behave differently? Still working on that. Okay, these cameras are far too new. There's not been enough research on them yet to really determine all the ins and outs of what's going on in those relationships. But everything points to these cameras being an effective tool for accountability. So we've talked about all these different mechanisms, but regardless of what police are using, the question always is, can the police effectively regulate themselves? Okay, proponents of internal investigations say yes, because they believe external reviews will not be fair. External reviews interfere with the authority of the chief and the administration. And the police believe that no one really understands what they do or how things should be done other than the actual police. Those that want external review argue that internal investigations are biased. They believe citizen input will result in more thorough and fair investigations. So the internal people are saying that the external people are biased. The external people are saying the internal people are biased. But the question of can the police themselves has always been a question. And you have examples where they do, and you have examples where they don't. But that's always going to be an issue when you're talking about accountability. All right, that was all internal stuff. Now, external accountability. Now, these external mechanisms have come about because of complaints that police don't hold their members accountable. One of the most common of these is civilian review boards, and they've been around for a while. About 80% of the 50 largest cities in America have some kind of external review mechanism. There's been issues between the police and civilians, that want to lodge a complaint. This has been going on for many, many years. There's several different ways citizen review boards are organized. If you look at the Inside Policing 11.3, it does a pretty good job discussing the differences. I'm not going to get into those, but make sure you kind of look at the differences and how those things can be organized. But civilian review boards were established with this belief that the police are not conducting thorough and fair investigations, and the civilian review board will then hold them accountable. There's been limited research in that area, but what's been found is that civilian review boards oftentimes do not find any more instances of behavior than do the police. They generally find that the police do a pretty good job of taking care of their own business. There's also police auditor systems. So these systems don't actually investigate misconduct, but they review policies and procedures of the organization. So they do this to make sure policies and procedures align with legal requirements and that they're operating at the most efficiently and effectively as they can. Okay, these auditors are independent of the department and can report publicly what they find and the recommendations that they make to the chief executive. Okay, so Missouri has an auditor, cities have auditors, counties have auditors. That's one thing that those people do is they can audit the police department, and they can look at all the policies and procedures, they can look at all the stuff, and if they find problems, they can make a public report about what they found and what the recommendations are that everybody can see. All right, so how effective is this oversight? Well, no one disagrees that the police need oversight. I don't think you'll find anyone that disagrees that the police don't need any oversight whatsoever. But one of the issues with oversight, especially when you're talking about external oversight, is that one of the things that police say is one of the biggest problems with the police accountability is the secretive nature of how they go about their business. Well, as you increase oversight mechanisms, what is the most logical thing that's going to happen? That secrecy is also going to increase, right? The more people try to see what you're doing, the more people are going to try to hide what they're doing because they don't trust the external people. They don't often trust the internal people. Okay, so you have all these kind of trust issues going on with everybody involved. And one of the things that they found is the more you try to put in some oversight mechanisms, the more closely knit and secretive police get. All right, so let's move on to moral and ethical standards or professional standards. All right, so efforts to increase the ethics of policing, you trace those back to the professionalization movement. Remember, we talked about this. Coming out of the political era, you had the professionalization movement, you had all this corruption, you had all this stuff going on, right? So they're like, this has got to stop. We've got to establish some moral and ethical standards for the police. Remember, we talked about guys like August Vollmer, O.W. Wilson. Those were two of the main proponents of police professionalization. And the professionalization movement sought to control officer decision-making through centralized chain of command and had strict methods of accountability to make officers do what management wanted them to do. Because remember, coming out of all this corruption, you had to have a way to keep the police officers from being corrupt. So you had this strict methods of accountability, chain of command. And they call that professionalization. But if you look at the professional criteria outlined in Inside Policing 11.7, it doesn't necessarily meet those, right? And it actually did the professionalization of the police really not occur that much until community-oriented policing became more prominent. Okay, because one of the key criteria is autonomy. And departments don't like police autonomy. Now, police officers do have some autonomy, right? Like they make decisions, they have to do things on the street, but departments have also sought to control police behavior through policies and procedures, etc. They don't want autonomous thinking. They don't want police officers just doing whatever. Okay, but that's a main thing of the professionalization criteria is autonomy. Okay, community-oriented policing allows that, increases officer decision-making, decentralizes the decision-making from the higher-ups. Okay, so that provides more autonomy. It also calls for a unique body of knowledge. Expertise can be gained from studying the work of experts, such as O.W. Wilson again and Vollmer. You can gain expertise through consulting and modeling. The police department's management practices are analyzed by an expert. And then you have expertise through scientific research. So you can make the argument that the police meet this particular requirement for professionalization. You have education and training. Formal preparation is also criterion professionalism. So you have academy training with the police, and you have this push for higher education. So there is some education and training, but not really at the level that they're looking at to call that a profession. Then you have certification and accreditation. Okay, professions have the certification that ensures quality and competence. So you have state standards organizations like POST, which is Police Officer Standards and Training, that fulfills this requirement for the police. Now, not all of them have POST. Some of them have something different that they call it, but every state has a standard that they use. And then you have CALEA, which is the main accreditation organization for policing. And accreditation is important for professional organizations. And there are benefits to accreditation, but it's not mandatory for police organizations. And some detractors say it really isn't necessary and doesn't really have much impact on agencies because a lot of it is just policy-based. You have policies for these things. It's not actually, are you doing these things? Do you have policies for those things? Then you have a commitment to service. And that is one place that the police certainly meet the criteria for professional organization. All right, ethical standards. Okay, ethical standards identify right and wrong. And if people don't have internalized ethical standards, not just police officers, anybody, right, they're more likely to engage in deviant behavior. But one issue with ethics is that they're internal to the person. Okay, an organization can try to attempt to change a person's inward beliefs, but that's difficult. They can try to make these code of conducts, they can try to do all these things, but if police officers don't believe that those standards are ethical or don't believe that what they're doing is ethical, it's going to be very, very hard to change that. So there's kind of these multiple perspectives on ethics too. The first is ethical formalism, and this places emphasis on doing one's duty. Okay, it could be like legalistic policing. Then you have ethical utilitarianism, and this is the results of one's actions determines what is moral or good. So behavior is judged not on the goodness of acts, but by the outcome. So not how we did it, but what we did. Okay? Means versus ends. Where did we hear that before? All right. Then you have ethical relativism. What's considered good varies with the values of the groups and individuals. Okay, so this could get into this where we used to talk about enforcing some laws in certain neighborhoods, but not those laws in others. So, differential policing. But it's good over here, but it's not good over here. All right, then finally, ethical dilemmas. Policing is full of ethical dilemmas. Ethical dilemmas are part of every day in policing. There's no way to escape them. The police are constantly dealing with them. Okay, but one of the central dilemmas is means versus ends. What's more important? Is it how the job is done, or the results that come from what is done. And does that change? Is that the same case-by-case basis? Is it always that? Is it always means over ends? Is it always ends over means? Or is it means over ends here, but ends over means here? Okay? Ethical dilemmas. You know, when you're talking about these ethical dilemmas, here's where you get your professional ethical standards coming in, right? You've got these dilemmas, so here's your standards you have to, adhere to. And those are fine. They provide good guidelines. But for some people, that's just stuff written down, right? That may have very little impact on day-to-day behavior, which goes back to why hiring and selection are so important for the police. Okay? You've got to have people that have internalized ethical standards. If you don't, handing people written down ethical standards really isn't probably going to make much of a difference. Okay? And the other problem you have is unpredictability. Okay? People in situations are unpredictable, so it's almost impossible or minimally difficult to control behavior. And then you have officers that subscribe to different ethical schools of thought. And if you subscribe to one of those three schools, you could justify your behavior in almost any situation. And then there's always informal group dynamics, police culture, the other officers that this person works with. What do they think? What are they doing? What do they think is most important? So, ethical dilemmas are a huge part of policing. And how police handle those things is very, very important when you're talking about behavior and accountability. All right, I'm going to stop here. Be sure to complete your assignments. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you next week.